Brilliant. Okay, Laura, how are we?
I'm good, Ian.
Very good.
Thank you.
Very good to have you in here. Bit of a strange kind of way how we've got to know each other. I think just for anybody listening, I think it might have been December last year.
Mid-December,
went on
Christmas.
that beautiful breathwork wellness retreat. And usually in those places, I always say you kind of meet like-minded people, similar frequencies, and everybody shares and being vulnerable. So I remember having a few side chats with yourself, and I thought you were really real. Also, you had heaps of bands, a good northern girl from the UK.
Northern British.
Exactly. So I enjoyed your company very much, and I know Katia did. I actually remember saying, I was sitting there with my missus, and I'd briefly spoken to you, and I said to Katia, I said, you should connect to her, you'll really enjoy your company. And I said that straight away.
Yeah.
And I actually said, Northern Girls, she'll have fun. And anyway, and now you're good friends.
Yeah.
I think, which is pretty cool. So obviously, you've been following our movements, the Good Men Helping Good Men movement, and obviously the Artistry of Humanity podcast quite closely. And obviously a good friend of ours, Grant, he recently went on and he had a really impactful story, and we met him at the same place, talk about synchronicities.
Yes.
So I know that, hearing from your story, and Katia mentioned that you might be interested in sharing, and I do believe that our stories, greatest pains are our gifts to help others heal. I always say that, and that's something that sounds like you are interested in doing. Hence, we're here today. So I appreciate you coming through. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. All right. So what I like to do first is just get a bit of a backstory on who you are and what's made the woman in front of us today. So it maybe just start from your childhood and tell us. Obviously, we now live in sunny Sydney, but you used to live in the miserable northwest, as beautiful as it is. So yeah, just give us a bit of a backstory from your earliest childhood, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, of course. So I think I like starting here, by the way, because I think it brings the context of where it all comes from. I think later on in life and the struggles. So I'll start with my mum and dad. My mum comes from a line of women that dealt with psychiatric issues. Her mother was a working woman, and she was left very young, 9 years old, I believe. And there was a lot of alcoholism in that side of the family and physical abuse. And then my dad's side of the family, also physical abuse and alcoholism. There was 5 of them, 4 on my mum's side. So generally, when I was of a young age, there was me, my sister, and my brother. My mum was a single mother, and we started, I think, watching physical abuse from a very young age. My father beating my mother. Wow. He was a very evil man, and he was, him and his 4 brothers, they were very physically abused when they were younger. And that really came out throughout our childhood under the age of 5. So we watched that for many years. And my father went to prison when I was 4, my sister 5, brother 3, for some unforgivable. I won't say what it is today on this podcast, but it was something that put him away for many, many years, so he wasn't around in our life. But we felt the shame of that. My mum was offered to go into witness protection program and turned it down, just for the sake of not having the finances and support. She never had a family. She was left at the age of 9. And I think, staying put in our town with our surname really created a lifelong shameful experience. Wow. My mum never had friends. We had a large family from all the, aunties and uncles and cousins, but they were never part of our life. And my mum was the one that called it into the police anyway, which is why they wanted to put us into witness protection program. The best thing she did, the reason she did that was, I guess she wanted to try and protect us and give us a life of some sort, so she saw it a better option to take him away. So he didn't really come back into our lives until we were teenagers. So we had the typical upbringing in the UK, we were very poor, went to a terrible school. We were part of gangs. We were out on the streets at 12 years old while my mum worked 2-3 jobs, and we were out there consuming drugs, very young, open and not protected at such a young age, vulnerable to lost my virginity at the age of 12 years old without consent. And part of the work that I did later in life about all that sexual abuse was stuff that I carried for many, many years. Carried that shame, thinking it was me, you know. And then when I did the work and looked back and had to really go into all of that, the discovery of knowing that I was a child and that all the people that I was surrounding myself with were a lot older. You know, these were men of 17, 18, 19, 20 years old. And, you know, I look back and I think, you know, I've had this conversation only recently with my mum that I shared this in the last few years while doing the growth journey. And I remember sort of crying on the phone from a few different things that had happened to me growing up, being sexually assaulted while I babysat for a child, and I woke up and something was going on with an older man in his 50s. So I was exposed to a lot of things like that. So as you know, a young teenager, we weren't protected as children, and just because she wasn't in the power, she didn't have the power to protect us. She was working 2-3 jobs. You know, we was always out in the back of the chip shop peeling spuds for a Kinder Egg, or in the back of the car while she delivered pizzas. You know, a typical British woman by herself, no family, no support, and also a very broken child herself. And that filtered through our childhood, and we definitely became the caregivers very young. And took over that role of parenting and stuff. So, you know, we missed out on a lot of, you know, physical nurturing, emotional nurturing. She wasn't in the capable hands to provide this to us. One thing she did give us, and we got from my mum, was hard work and resilience. And that's what's really helped us get through, I guess, the trauma of, you know, the childhood trauma, the hereditary trauma, you know, the generational trauma that just keeps coming through. You know, my brother, when he has a drink, this darkness comes out that comes from the men in the family, you know, and they just turn into these people that you don't feel safe around. And I never felt, obviously, you know, my father came back into our lives when we were teenagers. There was a quick experience of a few years of, you know, taking money off him, things like that. We didn't really know him. He was a massive drinker, had another child with someone, used to beat her. And then I went to his wedding when I was 17. He married someone. He never got involved with the fourth child that he had. She was part of our lives, but not his. And he got married when I was 17 years old, and that's when my mum had never actually told us stuff about their history, why he was in prison. We used to find out from the school books. You know, people used to write stuff in. People's parents wouldn't allow us to go into their houses. We didn't have a lot of friends because, again, they shamed us for his crime. And so when we were much older, I went to a library and actually looked into the past and the newspapers and stuff to try and figure it out and what it was all about. Anyway, so when I was 17, we were bridesmaid at his wedding. My mum was frightened because of what the family's like when it comes to alcohol, drugs, and just what they're like when they come together. And it kicked off. And the boys started fighting over a game of pool. My dad got involved and nobody did anything. Everyone stood still. He headbutted my brother twice, knocked out my cousin. So I started running over. He turns around, whacks me, knocks me out to the ground.
Wow.
You know, in this pretty little gold dress, his 17-year-old daughter. And I've never spoke to him since. That was the last day I've ever seen him, yeah. He tried to reach out a few times after that. Putting that aside, what he did to my mother when we were children, threw her down the stairs when she was pregnant, put her in a back brace, like the evil things that he's done. And the life that he created for her when technically it was the second person, you know, that could have shown her love. Her mum didn't give it to her. And he could have changed that for her and he didn't. He's never changed. He's still never changed. So with him, with my brother, really creates distrust in men. Coming into a 12-year-old girl and being sexually assaulted several times in different areas, not being protected. You know, I was free to roam the streets. I was very, very mature for my age in what I thought, you know, going to parties. My mum, used to drive around the streets trying to find us, dragging us in the car, and we'd climb back out the bathroom window down the pipe, you know. And she just didn't have that support for discipline and all of those things. She also never learnt it from her own childhood. So, yeah, that with those three things, that led to a lot of distrust in men. With my mum, I think, us really having to become caregivers and starting to look after her a lot, and she didn't fulfill those roles and wasn't able to. I think I became very female avoidant. But I think my experience with what I thought was love, which was the sexual abuse from people when I was a teenager and men, I really took that into my future relationships. I thought that was what it was, you know, like toxicity, abuse. I thought I was wanted. I thought I was needed. That was my distorted understanding of what love was, and not having it as much from my mum physically and emotionally. That's what I learnt was love. So that really went through into all my relationships in my 20s, you know, just abuse, screaming, just dating men with trauma, you know, bringing my trauma with their trauma. And, you know, we're not sometimes toxic people. We just got, you know, a toxic, traumatic past that we bring together, and we don't know how to communicate. We don't know how to be vulnerable. And I guess we're just constantly protecting ourselves from being a female avoidant or, you know, a male avoidant from like distrust and things like that. So I really struggled in my relationships. But I think I moved out when I was 15, super young. But, you know, never really went to high school.
My mum couldn't kick me out. I'm staying here. You do me ironing. You do me washing.
Blown away when you hear about Aussies staying in their homes until their late 20s, you know, because I've just had a massive life that started so early. Like, you know, the independence that you have to take with you then.
For sure.
The hard work and the resilience to get through at such a young age. But me and my mum was at each other, moved out. Got an apartment around the corner. I still used to take my washing back. But I started working very young. Like my first job was at 13. So I was doing all these little hospitality jobs. And then 15, moved out. I met a guy when I was 16, 10 years older than me. Spent several years with him. He was from Italy, so we travelled a lot. So we started moving out of Preston, doing the summer in Italy, and then back in the UK somewhere. We went to Formby once, where all the footballers were.
Used to live there.
We served arrabbiata pasta to Steven Gerrard.
Oh, the legend that is Steven Gerrard. Yeah, he's my hero
being
too.
So nervous, I put all Parmesan cheese down his lap. But after that, I started to see that there was something bigger than just Preston. You know, I'd never known anything. We just had such a struggling upbringing, you know, sharing gas money, sharing cigarettes, sharing bread, like, you know, bay leaves coming, taking furniture, watching my mum lock us out the house and put medication all over the table and contemplate suicide so often, you know, and I love that woman. You know, how she got through that. I mean, you picture now just being a single mother with 3 kids under the age of 5, 3 kids as teenagers. And
with hair programming as a child as well, to try to deal with her own shit and put that together. No, that's a special woman.
She is, and but those memories are there, you know, they're there. They're watching her, you know, suffer so much. And, you know, when we were all teenagers, she went and studied counselling. She thought that it might help her to be able to learn how to be a mother to teenagers, but she's never healed herself, still to this day. She's processed a lot, but she's just constantly been in depression her whole life. And we've taken a lot of, you know, I think her resilience and strength is really what we've taken. And I think the love that we have for her is really what's ingrained us to become better. And me leaving eventually, I just ran. So I just wanted to leave the UK for Preston. I just wanted to be aware. What that has cost me is an intimate relationship with my family. We're not very close. We have a good relationship, but we're not very close in terms of physical, intimacy-wise, emotional. It's foreign. Right, even when my mum's here, when she visits, I really struggle to put my arm around her. And emotionally, Again, we're just not very vulnerable. I think in the past we've been vulnerable with each other. We've had a drink, or we've consumed a substance that allows us to be a little bit more free. But as a collective family, we've not healed together. We're certainly healing separate. And I feel like eventually we're bridging back together. I feel my sister's become a psychotherapist recently, and she's dealing with all her stuff. And my brother's just finally conquered being sober for once in his life.
Oh, great.
His alcoholism has been there since the age of 15, and he's lied a lot throughout his drug addiction times, and created another relationship of distrust, another man to add to my list anyway of, brother, father, and X, Y, and Z. And he's put us through a lot. But yeah, he's in a good place now. He's just recently visited me in February. And it was tough. It was tough when people are on the other side of the world, it's really hard to maintain those relationships, when you're not physically touching and things like that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I kind of understand where you're at there. I mean, obviously, my mum and dad still live in Liverpool, so they're my two brothers. One of my brothers, when he gets pissed, he can get a bit aggressive, you know what I mean? It's almost a bit of a family joke, friend joke.
Yeah.
But it's not good to be around when he there's, I think certain people, there's just a chemical imbalance, and there's a certain switch, and when that switch goes off, they're off. It's not them.
Yeah.
They're a different person, and I totally forgive him for all the behaviours that he's done when he was younger. But I know that, and I love my brother. I love him to death. I know he loves me, but we haven't spoken since before Christmas. And, might be a little text here or there, and then something happens and somebody might be pissed off, and then we don't talk.
Yeah.
But that's my brother.
The
Do you know what I mean? I grew up with him, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and so there's that distance. My mum, I give her we speak maybe twice a week, and she'll I think I'm an outlet for a lot of stuff that kind of still goes on, maybe within the family. And I've got my younger brother Andrew and my dad, but that closeness is different. What I do find is when my mum and dad do come over here, I get more quality time when they come here. For me personally, because back in the UK, I've got traumas of the UK still. I don't know about you, but I go there, and obviously you've got your kind of really deep and powerful stuff that we're currently going through, and I've got some of my own different, but I don't like it there.
Yeah.
So when I go there, I'm like, because I was a different person then, and the person I am now, I love it here. I'm more on a higher vibration. I love taking my mum and dad around, and it feels like a holiday to me.
Yeah.
So I enjoy absorbing them more here rather than going there. But that disconnect, we're only here for X amount of years. And I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and a guy said he said about his he was talking to a friend. He talked about how often he sees his mum and dad, and he said, "Oh, where are they?" And he said, "Somewhere else." It was some guy who lives in the US. It was on the opposite side of the US, and he says, "Oh, once a year." And he said, "How old are they?" And he said, 65. And he goes, "Oh, so you're going to see your mum and dad for 15 more times before you die?" And he went, "What the fuck?" You know what I mean? When you look at that, it's like, holy shit. So I understand that, and I can feel that too, and I can empathise with you there. It's one of those catch-22s in it, because you love the life that you're building, and you would love them to be here, but maybe not there.
I'm pretty sure on Friday night out with your partner Katia, she was talking about statistics similar about how many days that we have left to live on an average. Yeah, how funny.
Yeah, well,
yeah. And I was like, when you look at it like that, it's quite, you go into panic mode. You think about it doesn't sound like a lot of days.
I know, it is quite eye-opening. So, thanks for sharing so far, and some really powerful stuff. And I'm seeing a really strong woman in front of me who's got amazing resilience, and you're a powerhouse. So, thank you for sharing so far. So, you're around 15 years of age now. Did you say where you were on so far?
Oh, I thought you meant now.
No, not now. No. You're looking well for your age. Bit of oil you later today. So you were around 15.
So
years
I was about 16, 17 roughly when I decided to leave.
Yep.
So I started moving around, and that was me just kind of running away. It was the only thing I knew what to do. So I stayed in a terrible relationship for many years. That was suffocating.
And you're saying that was that same thing, you were just identifying love is this, and you're getting more toxicity, more pain. And was that, you getting physical abuse within there as well?
No, it wasn't really physical. Funny enough, because of what my mum went through when she was younger, when she was with my father when we were young, and the physical abuse that she went through. One of the things she used to always drill into our heads, she gave us 2 golden nuggets. One, don't ever date a man that lives his life in the pub. That was what my dad was like every day, coming home smashed and, going to the toilet wherever he saw fit. And, that's where you'd be tiptoeing around a man when, when they've got trauma and it comes out with alcohol. So much comes out with alcohol. So she drilled that into us for years and years and years, especially when we were teenagers. And the second thing was she always used to constantly talk about walking away if anyone ever laid a finger onto you. And funny, the first man that ever did, I was actually 16 when that happened, and the police basically, they arrested him, and because I was actually underage and he was much older, he lied to them and said I'd lied about my age, and they let him go, and that was that.
Wow.
And he'd whacked me so hard on this side, he cracked all my teeth at a pub. And I was actually 15, and I was sat in a jacket. I was wearing like a red jacket, and he sang me this beautiful song, Lady in Red. And then he just, something twitched in him when I asked him a question, and that was it. He just cracked me right in the jaw. And I've still got all the cracked teeth that jammed, yeah. But because he just told that little white lie that he didn't know I'd lied about my age, they let him go, and that was that. But I think because she'd always told us about walking away, I think only one more relationship that I had in Australia in my 20s for a few years, he hit me towards the end. He was very verbally abusive, and that was terrorizing for me for years. I was always frightened. It was almost like him going to a place of unrecognizable, same as my brother and my dad, the place that they went, something so evil that you don't know what's going to happen to you, and you sit in fear as a woman. And that's what the relationship was like for years. But again, I'd not done work on myself. I didn't have my own value, my self-worth, self-esteem. I didn't have boundaries. I didn't have values. We weren't taught any of this. My mum didn't have any of these skills and wasn't taught it herself. We didn't grow up around a relationship. We never watched a healthy relationship. We just watched a single mother by herself, inner masculine, just very closed off. And as a kid, I used to think that she was very strong, but what it was just somebody that's closed off to intimacy, and I used to see this woman rocking around, ironing clothes, and my memory of childhood is like pulling her jeans, saying, "Mom, love me." I used to pretend that I had knits after school, so she'd stroke my hair and she'd do it, and it was so foreign for her. But that's what I used to do because I used to like her touching me,
Wow.
And that's what came up in therapy of my memory as a child. So I think physical abuse hasn't really been there much for me in terms of relationships. When it has, I have walked away. Generally, it's been at the end of the relationship anyway. We've already gone through a lot, and I know I'm being there out of pity, if that, so I left when I was 17, and again, I just ran. I didn't want my mum's life, I hate to say that. I've said it to her before. I didn't want the life that they had in the UK, her struggles. And when that first partner took me away and I started seeing other parts of the world, my dream was bigger than just being someone that rented an apartment, decorated, made pasta for her friends and worked a crappy little job and went to college for beauty. And, what do I do? I never went to school. Let's go and paint some eyebrows. So that was that. And I think I was in that relationship until I was about 20.
Okay.
And then I left and travelled across to Asia. Spent a few years there just drinking, binge drinking, like it was just in me. Substance abusing was in me, like just numbing. I just felt so empty as a human. And I just didn't understand it for years. I was just so angry. I was angry as a child, angry as a teenager, angry in my 20s. I wasn't a nice person. And I just took it out on anything I put my hands on. I think if I was in a relationship and they drank, I drank. They took drugs, I took drugs. I just copycatted. It was never about me. I didn't exist in any of it. I was there to please everyone else. If I dated a relationship, if he played golf, I played golf. There was just nothing. I just walked around on autopilot for years and years and years. My trauma, coping mechanisms, all the ADHD symptoms, that's what I did. I repressed, I suppressed, I still can't pull memories out of, when I've done my psychotherapy work, I still can't pull memories from childhood. A lot of stuff I know from my sister and brother remembering it. But I had I think because I left the UK, I was able to just leave it there and repress it and get on for years. Whereas I guess my sister and brother still presently being there and being around everything, the streets we lived on, the corners we got drunk on. And, I think maybe that's the difference in being able to let go, because like I said, the only thing that I could pull up in therapy was pulling my mum's jeans for attention and love, and I still couldn't remember a lot under the age of 5. My sister and brother remember my dad beating my mum. He used to drag us in the sitting room for us to watch. And,
that's incredible.
Yeah, and
so from Asia, you're partying.
Yeah,
you're giving it the big ones.
Yeah.
You're just running away from yourself, right?
Yeah.
Where did that take you?
So I spent several years over there, and then I think I arrived here in Australia when I was 22.
So I assume you're going like Bali, Thailand,
yeah,
stuff like that.
I did India, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore over a year, and left myself in a vulnerable situation to, the things that happen when you're in those states and all kinds of stuff, and building up shame, guilt, just compounding it for years and years and years, not having any awareness of why I felt the way I felt or why I behaved the way I behaved. And that went on for years, and I guess, I'd always managed to survive in that substance abusing. With distractions of work, partners, whatever it is, you seem to just, I guess, like closet addiction, closet substance abusing, you kind of in the background and nobody's really noticing that it's happening, because a lot of people are doing it with you. But I think it got really, really unmanageable in 2020. And I feel the pulse checks out with you. I chose that year because that was probably the worst year of life, I guess. It got so unmanageable. It was the first year of COVID. So again, if I refer to the pillars, I'd lost connection. I was living by myself. I'd broke up with my partner at the time. I had a second puppy who passed away. So I dealt with all these areas of grief. And I also just started consuming drugs. I was so numb and lost of not having, I guess, fulfilling those connections and going through grief of a partner, grief of a dog. But I think not having the distraction of working, because I was in the hospitality world doing weddings and events and stuff. So that all shut down for 2 years. Yeah. And not having that as a distraction, I realized that work had distracted all my trauma my whole life. I was able to hide behind it, just like my mum does, and everything just came to the forefront and just collapsed.
Well, I think you should pause on that one moment, because that's a really powerful thing that you've just mentioned there. First of all, to looking at your pulse check questions there, scoring, 2 out of that possible 20 at that moment in time. When you looked at this, I assume you were like, obviously it's going to be low because it was at your lowest point. And that point, that thing that you so 2 out of a possible 20, and we believe humans have, there's certain things and certain actions and certain elements that we need in our life to be fulfilled. And it's almost, this is why we try and put the systematic approach to it, because too many people are suffering mental health, suicidality, all of that, which we continue to talk about. And I'm always amazed when I look at this and people look at it. It's people just go, yeah, and then it gives them steps to go by. But you mentioned something there about work was distracting me from doing the work on myself, and it can be anything, can't it? It can be something that you could be addicted to health and fitness, although it's this great pillar. It's a good safety net for most people. Once you take that away, you're going to have to face the shit, and a lot of people don't want to face it, or because when you go, oh shit, here's that big scary monster I've got to deal with, and it's big work, right? And it's deep work, but I don't think until you do face it, I think your foundation's on jelly, because it's a distraction, and then although these are the big things, because this is you. This is your core. This is your authenticity. Who the hell Laura is, right? And it sounds like I can hear it in you. Number one, what little Laura had to deal with, nobody should ever have to deal with. And I give you, all the credit in the world to be standing here. You're a powerhouse. But now to be running away from it for so far, it's almost like that painful year was needed. You need that pain. I was listening to something yesterday, a life that's pretty good, but not your authentic, true purpose, is probably worse than having a terrible shit year, because it forces you to go, hang on a minute, and I've got to face this. Did it feel like you, when you were going through that, like kind of, first of all, how dark did it get for you when you were going through that year? You know, what was your lowest point?
Whew. So it was the year of 2020, and it got to the point, I think it's having time on your hands, right? And that's, you're not running around and seeing friends every night, and it's all distractions. You know, even when you just go to a retreat for a weekend, it's hard because we don't want to face it, because then we've got to go through that pain to overcome it. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, although on several occasions I overdosed. You know, it got to the point where I had no responsibility at the time. There was no superior. I never had a superior growing up in sense. So, you know, like, I struggled with this in the relationship at the time because I was consuming drugs behind my partner's back.
What drugs?
A mixture of everything, yeah.
Kitchen sink.
Definitely a mixture of everything. You know, definitely cocaine was probably one of the worst ones for me. That is, you know, that stimulation type thing is what really started to put me in a very depressed state. You know, it wasn't some of the other happy drugs that you can take and stuff like that, but amongst that, you know, GBL and GBH is something that I started consuming. I was partying a lot in the gay world before COVID. So a girlfriend had moved in with me. We spent a year just consuming drugs in the house. She was on depressant tablets. She lost her job, and that was impactful for her. And, you know, we spent a year doing that to the point where, you know, I'd overdosed a few times. I'd been in some state... Accidentally, yeah. Accidentally. I'd fallen over and cracked my head and was unconscious in the house for 2 days by myself.
Holy shit.
You know, and while this was all happening, there's definitely... I was building so much shame up in, like I said, in a closet manner. Like this, my girlfriend had moved out after a year and I'd continued doing it. And I just didn't know how to get it out of it. I was just in this loop. And I think your podcast last week that you actually did, he said the same. I forget his name, from Liverpool, but he said the same. He was consuming drugs to take his life. I was consuming drugs to take. I was up for days, and I was just consuming different things, just wanting it because I was sat in so much built-up shame. I wanted it to take my life. Because I'd never do it myself. I didn't have the balls to ever go through it. I also didn't want to. There was some kind of deep hope inside of me that knew there was an answer. What is the fucking answer? Like, why do I feel like this? Why do I feel empty? When I look around, why do people look like they're not struggling as much as me? Do you know what I mean? Like, it just was so difficult to feel any form of joy. You know, like, I'd always felt sad. I'd always been depressed. I'd always had chronic stress. You know, I worked 100 hours a week in hospitality. I drank and took drugs outside of that. I had terrible toxic relationships, but I was a good person. I had a good heart. I was caring, and I thought there's got to be an answer. But at the time, I wasn't finding it. You know, I was trapped in my house, and I would just kept consuming. And some days I didn't sleep for 4 or 5 days. To the point where I'd sit on my couch and my heart would be beating and I'd think it was the end. And then I'd start like getting moisturiser out and rubbing my arms and apologising to myself and kept saying to myself, I'm sorry, I'll stop doing this. I'm really going to try. I'm really going to try and figure out another way. I'd go through a withdrawal state. I'd try and go and work out. I'd try and eat some food. Some good food, you know. I tried to then put all this work into then getting over that, and the next Friday would come around and I'd be back in this habit of how do I get through this loneliness, this emptiness. And it got to the point, I think, you know, I took drugs when I was still with my partner. That was in 2021 as well. And we were having an argument, and that relationship itself confronted me and triggered me so much because he came from a functional family. and he wanted to communicate. And that man actually changed my life. I met him when I was 29, and he was the one that I wanted to go on the therapy journey with. The more I went on the therapy journey in the beginning, the more I actually consumed drugs because it was so hard to face. You know, like those first 2 years of doing the work that I was doing some really intense outpatient work, psychology, psychiatry. I tried so many things, but it was so painful that I'd keep going back and taking more because although I was doing the work, I wasn't changing the situation I was in. You know, my situations, the people that I was around, you know, they were my drug friends, they were my dance floor friends, you know, I'd never changed that. You know, I didn't have, over those couple of years, you know, the opportunity to live the way that you could outside of lockdown and COVID, so that really didn't help. But I think when I struggled in that relationship, I struggled with the avoidance, kind of the rejection and the abandonment came up a lot, and my anxious attachment style came up a lot. And also the avoidancy came up a lot, like I'd be flipping between two things. And to go through and deal with those kind of triggers in a relationship, the minute he left, I would go straight to drugs and take drugs because I felt so abandoned when he walked out the door. And this was all stuff then at the time. I didn't know why I behaved like that. And, you know, I think it was wanting to be loved so much, and even just having physical touch that I never had as a child. And I really craved it in a relationship, and I really put all of that onto a partner instead of doing my own work at the time. So I didn't really know where it came from. Also not having any boundaries in that relationship and stuff. So, you know, I did the work when I met this particular man because I wanted to be able to communicate. I wanted to have a functional relationship. You know, a functional relationship for me was boring. You know, I read books on it. We did therapy work together to try and really work through it. And that person changed my life as well. Yeah, for sure. He inspired me with self-care, self-love, lots of things. But at the time, it was still challenging, right? And we weren't right for each other in the end anyway. And it triggered me a lot. It made me feel like he was just there and I was broken. And even when we did therapy together, he said, I'm here for her. You know, and it constantly made me feel like we weren't working together as a team.
Gotcha.
It was always me having to fix my stuff. And that didn't work for me. That was just too triggering that I was always, you know, it wasn't a joint venture to heal together.
Sounds like a real pivotal part of your journey, though, of your movie. That was, you know, and it's good that you acknowledge that.
Yeah. But yeah, I overdosed. You know, I consumed drugs while I was with him quite a lot. I overdosed this one particular night. I stopped breathing.
Holy shit.
He'd never seen anything like that. He's not a drug consumer. You know, he'd never seen anything like it. Came out of nowhere for him. He was resuscitating me on the floor. And I was in some dark places, you know. I was trying anything I could, in a sense, for an accidental death, really. You know, because it just seemed to go on for a long time. I had a lot to heal, Ian. You know, like you don't just figure out your childhood and then move forward with it. Like, you know, takes years and years of work and hard work and awareness and self-discovery. And I wasn't there yet. I was still, you know, even though I was seeing just a psychologist and a psychiatrist, it wasn't enough. I wasn't getting the information that I needed. They were really working too much up top. You know, they weren't working with my feelings and emotions. I didn't even know what they were. I was so disassociated from my feelings. You know, how could I start healing without like being attached to myself or knowing what pain was or what joy was or even knowing how my childhood impacted me. So psychiatry didn't work for me. Psychology didn't work for me. So it wasn't until, so Alex I just said his name. Anyway, he resuscitated me, went through this whole trauma, you know, this traumatic experience himself. And I woke up in the hospital and in such shame, and I yelled at him and said, "What are you doing?" Like, you know, blah, 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 blah. And I was just a horrible person, but it was coming from shame and guilt and projecting on the other person. And he was like, "You'd stop breathing." I said, "No, I didn't." And, you know, I terrorized that man for many years. You know, he stuck by me for years while I went through all my substance abuse and drug addiction. And I ended up going into rehab at the end of 2020, around November. And it was I'd not slept in 5 days.
Wow.
And I had different drugs in my pockets. And I was sat on my balcony just... And my girlfriend that was living with me at the time, you know, she's trying to stop me, and she caught me in the bedroom. And there's just mixing trauma and worthlessness and together. And then, you know, I just got into a place, like I said, I just wanted it to end. And she started calling around. She asked me if I would go into a rehabilitation centre. Because I didn't see out, I couldn't change a lot of my situation during COVID. So how was I going to get out of this if I can't even change those, you know, the areas of the pillars and stuff like that? So we searched around and we found one in Kilco, which is around developmental immaturity, which was the best thing that I ever did, saying yes to that. I mean, I kicked and screamed while she dragged me there the next day, and I literally wouldn't go in sober. I consumed until I got there. Wow. You know, that's how ashamed I was. I couldn't face it sober. It was the best three weeks of my life. It was the most horrendous and the most beautiful. I guess it was where I actually self-discovered myself and the answer. Definitely the answer of why I'd always felt the way I'd felt, why I felt empty, you know, why I had these behaviours, and you know, just all the outcome of the childhood.
Yeah, that's really powerful, and you know, I'm so glad you did do that. First of all, because I can see you're a beautiful human being, and I'm glad you took those steps. You touch on some certain things didn't work, psychiatry and stuff didn't work, and you know, I hear a lot about that. That sometimes it feels like, I don't know, you know, what your thoughts are. Sometimes things can be overcomplicated, and it feels like people are being dragged over the pain a lot when they open up these doors of what this is. Is there sometimes, not that anything's simple, but did you feel like, especially for you, was the other approach a more simplistic approach that wasn't as fucking deep and dark and, you know, facing this pain all the time? What was it? I'm trying to understand, because obviously I haven't gone into this level of depth and I've heard a lot of stuff, but I don't necessarily understand it. Could you kind of bring that to life for me a little bit, of the difference?
Yeah, so I think for me at the time, it started, I was 28. Or 27 or 28. And it was coming to the last year in the 5-year relationship I had with someone, the one that hit me and the one that I walked away from. Towards the end of that, we'd gone through a lot of traumatic stuff. You know, I'd gone through an ectopic pregnancy. There was lots in that relationship where we'd built up so much resentment with each other. And towards the end, it was the first time I'd ever decided to go to the doctor and see a therapist. And my partner was like, "That's stupid, you shouldn't rely on other people," you know, yada, 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 that kind of stigma around it. Eventually I went anyway. I was having like nightmares all the time about entrapment. My family were being murdered in the dreams. And it was basically around entrapment. I was just stuck in a sponsorship and I was stuck in a relationship. And I'd gone to the doctor, and she tried to put me on medication first. And I've always been I've always been you know, I've tried it. I've tried twice, and I'll probably go into that shortly. But she tried to give me medication first, and I said no. And she then I said, "What about putting me onto a therapist so I can start doing some work?" She put me in with a psychiatrist, yeah. And I did 2 sessions. And for me, I think at the time, which I didn't know, because again, I'm just this, I don't know a lot, I don't know a lot about myself and anything really. Do you know what I mean? I'd always just lived on autopilot and just been angry and working in hospitality. And
Most people
I just had no knowledge of anything. And, I felt really stupid. I never went to school. I felt really worthless in those areas, like I didn't bring enough to. So I just worked hard and I was a weapon at my job always, and that's where I got some form of self-esteem and self-worth. But I think at the time, the psychiatry, because I've always been someone with coping mechanisms of over-control, ruminating back then before I started doing the work in those areas, perfectionism, I was always up here anyway, So when I went to these sessions, I just... I didn't need a diagnosis. Like, it's not what I was looking for. It was, I wanted to, how do I just live day to day? I don't need medication, but why, how do I feel better? And I think it wasn't until I went, and even the psychologist, I was just going there and it was just all up. I never sat there and breathed and felt my body.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
I was just like, and then all of a sudden the session's over and I went out feeling very stressed. And it wasn't until going into rehab that their model was formed around developmental immaturity. So they went back to your childhood, they went back to your parents, they went back to how things work out in terms of your attachment styles or, abandonment issues and how it all plays out in later on in life.
Beautiful.
But just answers, I think. But also it was where I learned my feelings and my emotions. And they were like, they'd sit there and I'd have to try and identify them. And I'm like, I don't know what you mean. I don't know what this is. Like, I couldn't feel it in my body, and that was mesmerizing for me.
Yeah,
I'm just like, so then once you can learn, to express, then you can communicate, I think personally, for me, I was never going to deal with childhood trauma through psychiatry and psychology. And there was nothing wrong with me, so I didn't need to search. And is there something wrong with my brain? It was just a lack of nurturing knowledge and self-worth, those main things for me.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes from the second approach. I think that I think in this day and age, it's kind of more and more prevalent and people are getting more and more value out of it. So, yeah, I think that's really powerful and I'm glad you did that. You've spoke about a couple of things there in the relationship so far in your journey, and those kind of almost triggers, loops that you would with certain people that you would go around within those kind of within those relationships. And I always say it's like when you're in your head and you're not on that your highest frequency, and it sounds like you were kind of, because it's important for other people to understand. I always say, we did a podcast last week about understanding what kind of narcissism was and understanding what kind of gaslighting was, because words get thrown out but people don't understand them. And I think when you're in those lower frequencies, like attracts like, and when you're in that frequency and your programming is, this is what love looks like, so this is what you think, so you're putting it out and you draw that in. And then when you're in those kind of loops, you get more of it. At what point did you realize that you were in these cycles? Was it in 2020? Was it before 2020? When was the realization? Was it after your work? What was it that kind of made you kind of almost the light bulb come on of you were in almost a life cycle loop based on your traumas that have programmed you? What was it that really woke you up?
So I think this was, it would have been 2 years before I went into rehab. So I was 29. I was out of the 5-year relationship. I was briefly dating someone for 6 months. This was the last toxic relationship I've ever had.
Let's go.
Yeah, and I accidentally got pregnant. And this was my third pregnancy. And the first one I was... mid-20s, like early 20s, with the 5-year relationship in Australia. And I ended up going through with the abortion, not what I wanted to do. Kind of talked into it because it wasn't respected by my partner's cultured family. Okay. He already had a daughter. So I went through for the abortion. Cried my eyes out, went through with it. Someone that's always wanted children. I was always looking after everyone's kids in school, like I was born to be a mother. I can't wait to be a mother. that is my dream, you know. And so the fact that I went through with that, I punished myself for years. And then we got pregnant when I was about 27, and we were overseas. We were traveling in Europe for 6 weeks. Accidental, you know, taking the pill in between implant-ons, things like that. Just, it happened, wasn't planned. We decided to keep the baby. We come back from Europe. I was about 8 weeks pregnant, 9 weeks pregnant. They'd sent me for an ultrasound. They couldn't hear a heartbeat. And they decided to mess around and send me somewhere else the week after. So in that week is when the baby had grown to 9 weeks, and it was an ectopic pregnancy, so it didn't make it through the fallopian tube, and it blew up. And I went into emergency surgery for a few days. It's such a awful thing to have gone through.
So sorry.
And I just could not process that after that. Like, I started to loop around thinking that was because I'd gone through the abortion. I felt like it was payback, you know. That's what I told myself. This is where I was at that time, you know. I was very hard on myself. So basically, after that, we broke down after that. The relationship really broke down. He didn't want to tell anyone, so I was just kept with that by myself. We didn't tell friends. We didn't tell his family. He just wanted to throw it under the rug, and that didn't work for me. So that's when it started to really break down. But that played out when I got pregnant when I was 29. I was 6 months in with this guy. It was that last toxic relationship. He was massive. We started the relationship drinking and taking drugs, basically. You know, it was all drugs, alcohol, sex, this, that, and the other. It was two traumatized people that had never dealt with anything. And I, at this point, still thought I was saving people. This is the way I used to look at it. I used to think I was picking up these projects and that, you know, because I had so much love to give. If I could give them that love, it could heal and they'd want me. But that's what it was. I think it was about being validated. You know, if I can get this person to really love me, then I am worthy. I think that's what my formula was, you know. I'd never understood that. I was actually someone that had so much trauma as well at the time, you know. I thought that that's the way relationships went, you know. And anyway, I was pregnant and I walked it. We had a disagreement. He thought I trapped him, X, Y, and Z, you know, that kind of cop out. A lot of fear of the fact of his childhood, yada, yada, yada. He wasn't happy about it. We took a few days apart. I said to him, you know, from what I've gone through in the past, I always said that I would never, ever go through and not go ahead with a pregnancy. And this has happened, unfortunately, you know what I mean? But I can't not go through with it. Anyway, a few days later, he took a few days. A few days later, I went over to his house and walked in, and there was a girl in his bed. They'd been sleeping together for months. She knew about me. So I'm stood there. 9 weeks pregnant with this guy. There's booze everywhere. There's drugs everywhere. They'd had a huge party. And I just died inside. I just thought, if I worked my whole life, left my family behind, felt nothing but guilt from not being with them. I've created a lonely internal life by myself. I've struggled for over 15 years. And I can't go through the same situation. I can't be a single mother and drop a child off to someone that is an alcoholic and a drug abuser. I can't. It was the most traumatic experience going and having to go through with another abortion because I had no choice. And I remember being sat there and the surgeon said to me, "Are you sure you can't go back to the UK?" And I said, "Honestly, you don't know how much I've gone through and how hard I've worked to not have that life. I can't take this child back to the UK. I've worked so hard. I feel like I'm getting somewhere. I feel like there's a better life out there for me." And I went through with it. Just based because every day I just kept seeing this image, this table full of drugs and alcohol and you know and just drama. So I went through with it, and at that point, a few days later, remember I just started seeing a psychologist after I went through the abortion. It was another time I was like, okay, let's try a psychologist. I need some help. I remember sitting on the balcony. I was drinking a bottle of wine, and it was the first time I'd ever spoke out and spoke to God. Higher power is the way that I look at it now, but back then it was God. And I was still asking the wrong questions. Why can't you send me the right man? Why can't you send me someone that I deserve? It wasn't about a man. This is the way that my formula worked. Always, looking that a man was going to complete me. And, it wasn't until years later that I realised that, it was always about me. I had to start with self, you know what I mean? I didn't have self-belief, self-worth, self-respect. I had none of the selves. And a few days after, that's when my partner came in, which was my first functional relationship. It wasn't perfect at all. We both had a lot still going on, but he communicated, he respected me. He was the first man that never disrespected me verbally. He was so beautiful. He was raised well, He was raised at a dinner table with respect and manners. And I was just slamming doors still and screaming and storming off. And he's like, what's wrong with you? Like, we have to talk about this. And I'm like, I couldn't. Nothing's passing the vocal cord. I'm like shutting down, you just go numb and you can't. My mum's like that now. I try and talk to my mum about stuff and she just chokes and she puts the phone down, And so he and, that relationship in itself was when I realised, and the pain that I'd gone through, the pain in relationships of being cheated on, and just, I've had partners cheat with girlfriends of mine, but that's the calibre of men I dated, and the friendships. I had terrible friends, and, that just kept adding to not trusting women and trusting men, the two. So the more that happened, the more I just internally just shut down and was alone, and...
Like that's a lot, right? That's a lot, And as I say, I've said it a couple of times there, you're a resilient fucker. You're a powerhouse, I'm proud to be sitting here with you today.
Thank you. Look, I've got waterproof mascara on.
You've been through almost the full round of what humanity can go through. You've had the kitchen sink thrown at you, and you're fucking still here today.
Yeah.
So fucking good on you, unbelievable.
Thank you.
And to have to do this growth and have the humility that you do have, and to be such a beautiful person, to be learning from these experiences and sharing this story now. I just want to pause here because this is, a lot of people that can really, know that you've been through it the lot, right? All of the abuse, mental, physical, sexual, ups, downs, children. It's just immense. So people need to pause and say, fucking go you. Look what little Laura's had to be through to be here today. And I really want to pause there. And I also want to call out, because what I'm seeing is, little Laura, what she's had to go through from a child. And fucking weak men at the very earliest stage. Your father, whoever else around that you mentioned at the beginning. That's fucking weakness. That's not a real man. It ain't a real man.
Yeah.
And, for any men listening here, this is what can happen when weak men aren't kept in line. Fucking, it upsets me hearing. This is what we're here for. This is what we're doing. Because strong men, if we fucking see this, we fucking sort it out. And it doesn't need to happen, because there'll be people in around who would have known this shit was going on and they haven't stood in. And I think, with social media and with, people are on this growth journey, I think we all need to... I think light's finding light at the moment. I think there's an awakening of what humanity is at our essence. And I think powerful stories like this need to wake more fucking men up to what, we should be doing. If we see something, fucking step in. If any of our brothers are behaving in a way, because a young child there's different levels of abuse. It can be mental abuse. It's following that child to this person who's sitting in front of me today. It's a lifetime of traumas. Just because you behave in a certain way, and again, it can be men to women, women to men, but we're talking specifically here about men to women in your story. So I want to hold men accountable and us accountable. So I just wanted to pause on that and say, everything that you've told me is being about weakness. That ain't strength hitting this. It's fucking weakness. Yeah. And I just wanted to pause and say, real men don't do that shit. Yeah. And thank you for sharing. It's really touching. It's really touching. Thank you. Okay. So you're now kind of, just come towards your 30s. Yeah. You've been through this. You've been through the loops in your relationships. You're realising, hang on a minute, there's a loop here. You've realised there's another guy showing you a new way. Okay, there's a new path. You're still kicking and screaming. Yeah. So you're here now. Because how old are you now?
36.
36. Okay, so we're getting towards where we are today. So where did we get from your early 30s?
So I guess that was the pivotal last experience that I went through. I guess that I wanted to change my path. When I reached out and asked the universe for, can you send me someone? That's when my ex-partner came along, which was in the same week, and everything changed from them. And I do believe that, people do come together sometimes for growth. Not forever, certainly to teach each other things. And inspire each other. And he's even, towards the end of that relationship, he's gone off and started doing all kinds of stuff that he used to call woo-woo and this and that. And, every time I bought him a stone and put it on a new pillar, he's like, fuck off. Yeah. So he's then taken my growth now and started to build more into his, his own growth path. And that's beautiful. I love that. I love that it does rub off on people. I couldn't
agree more. And I've had that the other way. To me, lad from Liverpool coming through, trying to grow naturally, always being kind of self-aware. I understood my traumas, kind of knew up here what they were. Didn't need to do too much of this. I only worked it all out. You know what I mean? I just needed to feel and understand and open up my heart and stuff. But even a previous partner of mine, although it didn't work out, we weren't meant to be. We weren't the right fit. I think we didn't align. But the woo-woo stuff, she used to say things to me, and so I'm like, what the fuck's this shit? And then I'd be like, it sounds all right, And then start. And now I'm like the one with the stones going, check these out. But it does, it's like these little acorns that grow in people, and it resonates with me, that.
I think through that as well, we need to understand that, what works for us at the time doesn't work for them. Back then I was a pushy, because I was always wanting to help others. So I'm like, this works for you. This will work for you. There's, this, that, and the other. There's an amethyst and, different things. And over time, I've realised my mum will send me stuff and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I'm not interested. It's not for me now. I'm not going on a fucking walking group, And but some things have happened later on in life, and I've picked it up. I think we pick it up when we're ready.
100%.
We can't. If someone else is spiritual, that doesn't mean we can just go and be spiritual. Like my spiritual path came from nearly either overdosing and dying or taking my own life through, substance abuse. So, and then going on the journey to try and find the answer of how to live better. And I think by doing that, that's what's allowed me to start to believe in something bigger. I think, and once I started to believe in a higher power, things just come, I put out a more positive energy to the world. I'm a lot more open now. I after rehab, anyway, I did 2 years worth of outpatient courses, codependency, relapse therapy, mastering moods, how to master anxiety, things like that. What I realised at the time was, private health insurance covers you for everything in a psychiatric ward. So if you go through countless courses available to us. We don't have to do this 10 package deal for a psychologist at the doctor. We can go and study 6 months worth of codependency. Things that really help us. Not just going and talking about, personally at the time, my weekly problems with a psychologist wasn't the right thing. It was learning, having skills that help me in a relationship, help me communicate. help me try to master these feelings that come up every day, the pain, the sadness, X, Y, and Z, and try to have tools and outlets instead of, going to a substance. So, I did that for 2 years, which was remarkable. Never knew that was a thing, that we had access to that. Right. So then I went on and did RODBT, which is working on that radically open, because I was a very over-controlling perfectionist. And that really, once you live that kind of lifestyle, you take your joy out of life as well. You're just internally lonely. You can't intimately connect with people. So I did that during the second year of lockdown. And we learned how to socially signal and stuff. You don't even realise how important that is to connect with people, right? Just to do the right eyebrow wag. You can't do it now, just like Botox.
Like, what you doing?
There's nothing moving. So I became obsessed with courses and courses. But the more work I did in 2020, 21, the start of 22, I was in so much pain dealing with this too, that I was still consuming drugs. Like, it still took me many years to be able to start fulfilling myself in the areas of connections, because I had to go through a filtering system of friends. It doesn't happen overnight. It took a while. And while it was happening, one thing I said was that I was never going to go into a rehabilitation centre again, because at the end of the day, I've always been a strong, resilient person and very steadfast. And, I've always worked extremely hard to be better, probably sometimes too, you know what I mean? And that's why the joy gets taken a little bit. But I think I just worked so hard doing course after course after course that at the time I probably wasn't actioning enough. I was just taking in all this knowledge and not having the space to integrate it. Whereas now, in the last few years, I'm now pulling out those workbooks all the time. Like if I'm having trouble in a certain area, I'll pull out the stuff, whether it's emotional eating, mindful eating. Like, there's so much stuff that I've done. Like, and these things happen, they're always going to come back a little bit, whether it's in a relationship with a different wherever you're getting triggered, and you can go back to that. And I think it wasn't until last year that I did the full complete year sober. What I did was I realised a psychotherapist that I was seeing at the time, I've spent, a different time. I've spent time with different styles of therapists. Like, every year I'll always change to someone else, whether it was a neuropsychologist that worked around, the female reproductive area and hormonal and depression in women. So I worked with her for a while, and we learned how to strategize on the coping, like the symptoms of ADHD. I don't like to refer to ADHD as a thing for me, because I use it as an excuse. That's what I found. I was always using it as an excuse. So if I identify the symptoms instead, I feel that I can manage them a lot more. So we strategized around those kind of symptoms. And then I did work with a male psychotherapist for a while, because I wanted to learn how to have that, how to be comfortable around a man. And even during that, those sessions in that year that I spent with him, like when he complimented me, I'd shift in my chair, because I was so used to being lied to by a man. And, like in relationships, I love you, but I'm going to cheat on you, So how do you, so I worked through that, and that was interesting for me. And then I worked with a woman, mainly around more of the relationship styles and, the anxious stuff and the avoidancy. And I really worked a lot in that. I did some processes in that and really pulled up and gave all that shit back to the men in the past. So I've always kind of moved into different areas to keep growing, rather than just sticking in the same formula, same format. I think it's never worked for me to sit with the same therapist and go over my childhood. I'm not there anymore. I've definitely discovered all of that. I've done the work. I think where I'm at the last couple of years is I realised substances don't work for me, right? I don't really enjoy them. I don't survive on them either. Like, if I'm drinking and things like that, everything gets worse. My symptoms get worse, my concentration, sleep deprivation, my focus. The joy's not there. I can't sit at a dinner and laugh, It's just... and last year was the best year that I've ever had in my life. I've never experienced so much joy in my life.
Being sober. Who would have thought it?
Because so much more comes with it. Yeah. I've said it to so many people. I could not believe how I felt last year. I was like, I'm 35 years old. How have I never felt like this? Ever. And I was like, this is what life is about. This is how we're meant to feel. You know, throw some sadness and pain in there and some hormones and shit like that. That's fine. But that's how we're meant to feel.
Oh, I love
and
that.
I felt it.
I love that because obviously I used to party a lot back in the UK, at Liverpool and stuff. And I just found when you're giving it a big one over the weekend, 2 or 3 drinking benders and whatever else, and then you kind of live in like this grey land. It's vanilla, even like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Then you're looking forward to the Friday, and everybody talks about it. But basically, your whole life is just grey.
Yeah.
And I find now again, and even over here, I didn't really party, but I might get pissed on a Saturday and a Sunday, Monday, I'll be a bit
You're old
sluggish.
now, aren't you?
I know, I'm very old now. I'm 47. I don't look it. So I used to find that it would just be a little bit grey. And even now, I catch myself if I do something. If I go really deep in a weekend that we do, there's a lot of emotions flying around and it can drain you. And then I'm like this on a Monday, Tuesday, and I catch myself thinking, this feels a bit shit. And then I go, oh, I've really hammered myself. I'm my body's all dysregulated. And then, because the majority of the time now, I can just walk around and just hear the birds tweeting, looking at the beach, looking at that. Like, fucking life's great. And I never used to have that.
Yeah.
And I much prefer that. Even getting up in the morning, me and my missus, we get up, catch you, as you know, and I kind of almost get excited sometimes. Sometimes I'll do work, but I sometimes get excited to sit in our little front bit. We've got the 2 seats there. The sun's coming up. We get our book, put the tunes on, and we're having a coffee, be talking. And I'll be looking at a book going, have you read this little bit? And I'll be talking to her going, this reminds me of you, this. And she'll be going, fuck off, this reminds me of you. And I enjoy that. And we'll sit there sometimes for 2 hours just shooting the shit. And I love that more than going out on a piss, than clubbing, than that. Hands down, that experience of like just pure joy. And there's nothing, there's no money, there's no drugs, there's no drink. Just being really present, especially with somebody that you love, right?
Yeah.
And that means more to me. I say it all the time, more to me than any party, any of the hedonistic lifestyle that I used to live. So that really resonates with me, that.
I do think sometimes when I get 4, 5, 6 a.m. messages off you two, I think, God, these two are nuts. And then I'm like, actually, I'm up.
Exactly. I was up at about, I think, 4:30 this morning. You kind of, throughout all of this, you mentioned early on, I heard you tap on that, what your mum was giving you, that resilience drive. And it's funny you say, because I've got a little bit of that in me. I was like, I work, and no one can outwork me. And even now to this day, even I said, I was up at 4:30. I've got this thing in me, like, I get up and I get after it, you know what I mean? Yeah. And it still hasn't left me. It is what it is. It's how I operate. But I've kind of, no one will outwork me. Somebody might be smarter, but they're not going to outwork me. You've obviously did quite well for yourself as well. So as a woman coming through all of this, really, successful, doing well in your own right. You've done relatively well in business. How have you? Did that? It sounds like that distracted you as well. Running around doing stuff from the work.
Yeah.
But where you are now, with all of this work, and I know we talk about relationships with men, and I want to kind of move, towards that now. How have you found that being a successful, powerhouse of a woman in all areas of your life? How has that been for you with meeting men? How is that?
Meeting men. It's been challenging, actually. I think, the last few years, I think deciding to do more sobriety, and not full sobriety. I don't really want to close myself off to that. I have a cocktail here and there, yada, yada, yada. But in general, I decided to live without it, to be honest. And last year when I did that, that's when things started to really take off with me. I'm in the middle of doing a project with some property at the moment, and that's been on hold for 4 years. I bought that property in 2020, and I just live in that kind of lifestyle and not having the confidence and all that kind of stuff. In the last year is when I've started to make real progress and changes and figure out where I'm going career-wise as well. I'm trying to transition, which is why I've added some things. I'm really trying to get into the wellness area. I think that's why I'm here today. I really want to use this story now. Instead of keep working on myself in that sense of, healing the past, I'm ready to give.
100%.
It's been calling me for a long time. You need to give this out now. I feel like I inspire a lot of people.
It's oozing out to you.
Yeah.
You will. You inspire.
So I think I'm in that transition at this point. But in terms of relationships with men, one, I've not had social media since I was 29. So I got rid of social media when that happened with the guy, and I went through that traumatic experience with the abortion. And I, at that point, was losing myself. Like, I didn't know who I was. So at that point, I decided to get rid of that because I was getting, I was very insecure. I was a lost, insecure girl, and I was competing with people online. I was getting really offended, taking things personal. It wasn't good for me. I was too vulnerable for it. And so that opened me up to spending a lot of time in doing all this growth work and training and courses and all kinds of stuff, which has put me in the successful place that I'm at now, And I think not having social media and then also I've gone in and done the dating apps twice, and I got treated so poorly from my standards of what it should be like. People ignoring you, you don't get respected as a human form. Somebody's behind, you're not getting any respect. There's just so many triggering things on there. And I think if you're not a very strong, secure person at the time, that's also very damaging. I've got a lot of girlfriends that have been on it for 7-8 years, still single, still having to take breaks because of the treatment that they get.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that about those apps. They're bonkers because when I came after a long-term relationship, and I was about 3 or 4 months before I met Katya, and I got on the old app and stuff like that, and then you kind of get into it and you think, oh, this is cool because it's fresh and new. You kind of, okay, I'm going to meet somebody new. You kind of get a bit of an excitement. It feels like another job. You come out, you finish your work, and you're like, oh, I've got this 18 things to play with or send stuff out, and it's like that because we're in the dopamine era of people next. So you can connect with somebody on it, and then they probably get bored and go, who's this next one? Before you've even met and hooked up or done anything. Yeah. So I found that absolutely bonkers. And I was the same. I was like, fuck this. And that was the thing for me is, it was a friend of mine, Martin, who's been on the podcast. You might have seen him on the podcast. He said to me, we work together, and I've helped him a couple of times. He's helped me. And I remember him saying to me, he said, well, get off those apps. And he said, and I said, because I was still go out on the weekend and drink. And he was saying, what are you trying to do? I said, I'll get pissed and maybe meet someone when I go out. And I didn't necessarily like to go over. I've never really gone over to women sober, you know what I mean? I'd be out and I'd be on the piss. And he said to me, why are you going out on the piss to meet someone? Do you want to really want to meeting somebody at 2 a.m. on the piss? Is that, what are you after now? And I said, well, actually, I'm probably only going out to meet someone. I actually don't really want to go out that much now. I'm much more into health and fitness. I'm trying to grow. I'm trying to, into my meditation and all that. He said, just go over to go over to someone, you pussy. He said, he started thinking, and I was like, who's a pussy? So I was like, okay. And he was giving me the nudge, and I was like, and he said it to me, and then 2 days later, seeing Katya in the gym, and I just went, I'm going to go and speak to her. And it was and I went, right, if I see her tomorrow, I'm going to go over. And she was the first girl I've ever went over to sober.
That's so good, because this is why it doesn't happen. People don't approach you anymore.
And I went over to her, and I was like, even me, I was like, fucking hell, here we go. Here we go. And I just had to approach her normally. I said, oh, you train like a beast. You had towels, 3 towels over different equipment. She was just giving it the big one. She looks classy and all that. She's my type of chick. Why didn't I just go over to her? I've never done that before. And would you find, she obviously, she said, yeah, great. Yep. We're here today. Would you find that more, how would you find that in especially from what you've been through, would you welcome that if a guy come over to you in a decent way and wasn't an arsehole and just said, hey, da-da-da, would you prefer that? How do most women think of things? Is the app more safe, or if someone coming over and just saying, hey, you're really attractive, can I get your number? What would appeal to you?
I think for me personally, I think because I've not hidden behind a social media page for such a long time, and I've done so much work in an organic environment of intimacy with people and group therapy and all kinds of stuff, and I naturally now connect in the moment. I'm an energy person, so the apps are a no-go for me type of thing. I have to, it's how I feel in that moment, because you can really feel honesty, dishonesty, things like that. And I tend to find that I'm a really good, I'm a people reader. Do you know what I mean? I pay attention to a lot of stuff because I'm very hypersensitive, so I can feel what's happening and stuff. But I'm very organic in terms of the way I want to meet people, or I do, meet people, which I think in the last few years, in this massive transition of leaving alcohol and drugs and things like that behind, I've left that party world where it's the biggest place you meet people when 100%. You're out and about, right? So take that away. So then I've changed lots of things. I used to predominantly train at Barry's. It was a lazy way of training, 'cause not having the concentration and focus. I like to be yelled at. So last year I decided to make some changes. I moved into an apartment instead of a house. You know, there's 300 apartments there. There's more of a community. I moved gyms. I went to, gender-neutral gym to obviously maybe meet more women and men. Again, I've been there a year, nothing. Nothing, because people don't approach you, I think.
That's what I'm saying, and I want to pause on that, because most men don't realise, get off the apps and just be real and go over to someone, because... I mentioned to you beforehand, I am a big believer in honesty as the way. Yeah. Being vulnerable, being real. And even going up to, like, when I went up to Katia, she probably seen a bit of vulnerability in me, because I'm like, oh, hey, you know what I mean? But I wasn't being an arsehole. I wasn't being a cocky fucker. I was just being real and genuine. And you can see in people's eyes if they're being real and genuine. And it's like, so you're there, you're an attractive lady, you've been going to the gym and nobody's come over and said, hey, I want to take you out. But they might, if they've seen you on the app, they'd probably go home and go, oh, I'll send her a thing on the app. She's right there. And that's what I'm saying to a lot of men, I believe, is... I think we should go back to, what we used to do.
The amount of times you'd be approached by people at a bus stop, like no matter where you were, people would talk to you and ask you out. And I miss that. That's why, the statistics of people being single they're shocking because people, for a year in the gym, there's certain people that'll stare at me and things like that, and I think, come on, so I've started to try and do other things, and sometimes I think where I'm at, being a successful woman, I think we've spoke about the feminine and the masculine. I think I've not had a life where I've been able to just naturally go into the feminine area, right? So I think having so many walls of protection up, and even though I'm on this path of healing and getting to a place of, being able to trust people and X, Y, and Z and communicate and have my boundaries and have my values, and as long as they're there, then I should be a solid wall to not get hurt and not be vulnerable for more pain. But at the same time, there's not many people that I meet now that are also putting in that work, which is why I started trying to venture out into different areas like breath work and retreats and, walking groups, like not the walking groups. I take that back. I was thinking recently about going and start doing a running club. I'm trying to really figure out where do I go. Like last week I went on ChatGPT and I'm like, all right, what are the options when you're not a drinker? Like what are the options these days? Because I think it would have been September last year. It was the second time I decided to go on the apps. I dated one man for 6 weeks, and the minute I spoke about my feelings, to be honest, I've not been, out there a lot. So when I put myself out there, I had all this healing and all this work that I'd done in therapy. So, this is my first kind of relationship that I'm going into where I can practice all of these, with the tools. Now, I'd kind of already seen that he wasn't for me. There was something that he was lacking in integrity as a man, and I saw that. But I was like, you know what? He's from London. He's charming. I'm loving this. He's worked in an industry that's been around women, and I knew, I could feel it wasn't authentic. But I went with it anyway. So this is where I think sometimes you have to go through that to then pull yourself back up. But the minute I started talking about my feelings a few weeks in, that was it. He went back on the apps, he removed me, and then basically he put me in this place where I got really challenged and triggered. And I was like, why is this happening? I've done so much work. Why is he disrespecting me? And, why I'm just communicating my feelings, which is what I've been taught to do, which is the right thing to do to be able to move forward. And I think this particular person, mid-40s, clearly just so eeasier to go back on the app and find someone else. Yeah. Rather than be faced with a challenging question Yeah,
it's funny you should say that, because basically what I'm hearing is, to cut through all the shit, we need to stop wearing masks, whether men or women, because if we match, because we'll be all different journeys, but what a lot of people do is they'll kind of go, oh, fucking wear this mask, they're trying to attract this person. But at some point in the relationship, that mask is going to drop, and the relationship will either succeed or fail based on that true person. Yeah. So just show each other the true who you are early. Get rid of the bullshit. Be vulnerable, be real, and then you'll find out if you're matched. because a lot of people go in with a mask.
Yeah.
And you'll find that now. You know, I would imagine your mask is dropped, right? So you just come in, this is me, warts and all. And that's what I did with Katya. And it's the only, when I did it, it's the first relationship I've gone in and not kind of gone in either on the drink, you know, because you meet each other weekend, it's all party. 6 months down the line, you go, oh, fucking hell, something's not right here. You know what I mean?
Did I choose you?
Yeah, but why am I here again? I've moved in with somebody and I don't even really know them. You know what I mean? And we just don't do an imbalance. So my thing would be for any men or women out there going into a relationship, just be fucking real. Yeah. Be real and give yourself a shot. Yeah. Because there's nothing worse than being in a relationship that doesn't work. It's like a prison. You might as well just get it out the way early.
Yeah, I'm certainly meeting a lot of people that are, still, I guess, protecting from their own pain. But I think people going on the apps constantly, they're just getting more pain and more pain and distreated. And they're closing off even more. And they're just dating countless men or countless women and going through the same thing and closing down even more.
And then I think it creates division as well, because then people latch onto it and say, oh, women are going through all these men and they think they can go for these top five and all this stuff's coming out. But everyone's suffering because everyone's just got this dopamine thing. Yeah. And I think it's creating more division. So I think we just need to go back to old. I think everything in humanity now, we just go back to the old days, right? It's much more successful. When you've been doing the kind of, you've been doing well successfully, have you ever found, because I noticed on here, can you identify real purpose to your work? So in your most as you are today, you know, I think you were 18 out of 20. Fucking let's go. From that 2 out of 20 to 18 out of 20. And one of those key things is, can you identify real purpose to your work? And that was something that you were kind of considering. A lot of people I find, because to be there, fucking good on you, great. And obviously you can see it in a much stronger place. You've got a much stronger foundation. But to really continue, because it's an ever evolving thing. We never just hit 20 out of 20. We just revamp our own questions and go, okay, let's keep pushing for continued excellence and continued fulfillment, because it's in the progress that we as humans get that fulfillment juice. People can get stuck in the money trap, in the money matrix, and think it's all about money and how can I get this money and this, that, and the other. But we always put that purpose in, because the money just dissolves in front of your fucking hands, and then you get the next one. I'm going to do this thing, and then it fucking dissolves. I remember when we first started the business. I owned one of the business owners to Kiss My Ex. Oh, this thing, when I get this venue, I remember getting it up, starting it. We popped our head out the window, and there was a queue down the road to get into it on one of our opening days. And I was like, fucking hell, look at this. This is fucking amazing. And I sat back down. I was like, now what? Fuck, now what? This has been like a year in the making. We've done all of this stuff. And I'd hit the top, and I was like, okay, now what? And I found this bit of purpose myself. So it's interesting that you do that, because I think a lot of people get stuck in the money trap, the money matrix. It drives in authenticity. If people are, especially in a corporate job, they kind of can stick in a job. The manager's an arsehole. They'll push them to act like an arsehole because they'll force them to lead in a certain way, but they're doing it for the money. And I've found myself in that previously. How are you now in that space, money versus purpose, and that you kind of finding your balance now?
I think in my 20s, I had a really successful career in catering and events. We won several awards every year in New South Wales, but I was doing design work, so my creativity came out, floristry, event styling and stuff. So I was fulfilled. I loved it, to the point where I wasn't even sleeping, because I was designing tables in my head or designing wedding events. But I enjoyed it. I loved it. I was there 100 hours a week. So throughout that stage, I was running several venues at the same time for certain companies, but I just thrived on it. I was there. I had no work-life balance. I didn't really know much about that at the time, but I was much happier and fulfilled then on just a salary, as opposed to what I've created today. But I think now, what I've created now is investments and I think the desperation of trying to set myself up to be a future mother and not have to rely on anyone, knowing that I've chosen this country without a family here. I know that I wanted that security to be able to then become a great mother and have something there that I didn't have to take from anyone else, and I've accomplished that.
Good on you.
So, that was the dream, and I've got there now. But in the industries, there's nothing fulfilling for me. You know, I tried to do interior design there for a while. That I thought that I'd really get into the property side of it, and you know, maybe get really stuck into that. But I really struggled with the studying. I think at the time where I was when I tried to do that in 21, I was still abusing drugs. I was still, the lifestyle I lived, my ADHD symptoms were very prevalent. I couldn't even focus. Like, I didn't have confidence. So at the time, it didn't really go ahead. But I've always been a trier anyway. I'll always keep going, and trying something. But now I know I'm not fulfilled. I'm passionate about retreats and wellness. And that's, I live and breathe that kind of stuff daily myself. I'm always at a bathhouse. So I've been really trying to, knowing that I'm in a good place financially, I'm like, what is next? And I tried to I set a business plan up, and I started looking at places around the inner west to start a particular wellness industry business. And at the time, I just could not find the space. And then I realized I probably still wasn't ready. I've added to things like yoga and breath work and trained in things like that. And I know where I'm going. So at the moment, I've ticked it because I'm not fulfilled at the moment. I'm not doing something. I know that I want to give back. I want to be in women's circles. I envision having these retreats where people can come and they can either do body work, psychiatry work, whatever they want to do, but they come for answers and knowledge. And, it's a wellness place where they're taking away tools and they're going home and they can make life-changing things happen. And so I know I'm on my way there, and at least it's the only pillar mostly that I'm suffering
exactly.
in.
I'm amazed. But yeah, it's important that, because I think I found that what you just discussed there is sometimes you can get to a position, it's good to drive, get the money, give yourself security, because what that can give you is the freedom to find your purpose. Because it's a journey. I think when you're younger, fucking graft, give yourself that position. That's great. Build up resilience, find what you want, and then it's like me now. This fulfills the shit out of me. This is my purpose. This is my mission. Good men helping good men. Good women helping good women. Hopefully you can help us out with that. And I think people need to understand that it's a journey, and it's bumpy. You'll be all over the place, but ultimately just keep an eye out. What's that niggling thing? It's my purpose. Then when it clicks in, let's go for it.
I think another point I want to make there as well is it's only in the last few months that I've accepted it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know that I'm thriving, and I've started journaling a lot more these days, because I know that if I don't journal, I'm not reflecting and holding myself accountable. And I would be stressing about this one particular thing in that one pillar while I'm succeeding in all the other four. And I would just be, you know what I mean, being very anal about this one particular thing. And then it's taken the joy out of my daily life. So in the last few months, I've realized that, things always happen in time anyway. So I've let it go. Yeah. Instead of focusing on, I'm not happy in my job or my career or what I'm currently doing, because things pass.
Yeah, 100%. I believe that it's. I've got this thing keeps coming to me: flow, not force. Because the size of the movement that I'm working on at the moment, sometimes it can feel a bit overwhelming, and I'm a bit of a. I'm an action taker. I like to poke doors, and that's how I believe the universe then open. You poke that door, and the universe can drop in and go, no, fuck off, or it can come through and say, this is the one. But sometimes I can do that a bit too much, and I can muddle things up. So I'm working in flow, not force. I'm waiting for the right, and it seems like the right people are just starting to drop in around me, and then things happen, because you can't do certain things without the right people floating in around you.
I guess you can have the drive, but still just have that relaxed mindset about it. There has to be a combination of that, right?
Yeah, you've got to allow the thing to do its thing sometimes. All right, so what would the biggest? I mean, as I said, what a deep, beautiful human, story that you've got, which will help many people. What would your biggest lesson be, and what would your biggest lesson be, and what would you give to any young women out there today? What would your kind of biggest advice be from your journey?
God, there's so many things. Especially from my journey, there's so many things I've learned, but I think for me personally, I think two things. One is definitely starting with self. I never worked on myself at all. Everything I did was for every external person or every external item or job, and I never really focused on me, which is, at 30, I was still saying, send me the right man. You know what I mean? Or putting makeup on when I had a date instead of for myself. Like, I just didn't do things myself. I didn't have that self-respect. which left me vulnerable to lots of different things. Self-belief, and it all comes once you start to heal. Like nothing's just there. Self-esteem, and so I think the self is number one, because I didn't get there until I was 30. So living 30 years of not putting myself first is just heartbreaking. It's just it's a life that I've missed of a life of love for myself. I think the second thing is, I definitely want to share it, is because of the situation. So I think going through the trauma and the struggle and the pain that I was at, I had to change my situation. I think when you get really dark into depression, it's currently not living a particular life. It's the current life that you live in, let's say the 5 pillars, you know what I mean, in the relationships, friendships, work-life balance. Like if the job's not fulfilling you, just go and change it, like really making the changes in the situation that's impacting you, I think. Like when I finally got impacted, everything was out of balance, the wrong friends, the wrong relationship. At the time the job was out of my control anyway, but I still could have found fulfilling things to do in place of that. It was all set up wrong for me. So it took me years to get there, but baby step at a time, changing situation by situation. Coming from the UK, being brought up on tinned food. Like I didn't start learning about nutrition until I was 31. I only did that because I did PT during COVID. I needed to get someone to help me around these, drug benders that I was having. And while doing the PT, he's like, you're not eating right. So there was all that stuff that I learned. And it was changing the situation, I guess, in my eating habits and things like that. But it all just takes time. But I think you've got to change the situation. Otherwise, you stay stuck in depression. You stay stuck in chronic stress and, in an unjoyful place.
Self, taking care of yourself mentally, what you stick in your body. Yeah. And as you say, if you're depressed, it ain't going to get any better on the sofa. Yeah. You just got to get moving, poke some doors, let the universe drop in for you and I think that's really, really important advice. And again, I said because, I'm a big believer in the rising tide lifts all boats, and men and women need to work in symbiosis to get out of this shit. Humanity seems to be, it feels to me that it's hit the bottom of the pool and we're about to kick back up. But I think we can only do this by rising together. Yeah. I think the thing I said before, your story is so, so powerful, and I'm so, blessed that you've been here to share that with us, and I hope it helps a lot of people out there. But I genuinely believe that what we need to do is, understand, as I said, what's happened to this young girl. What's happened to little Laura? You know what I mean? Just like there was a little Ian that brought me to here, there's a little Laura. I love that. Perfectly imperfect. There's a song. There's a song I'll share with you after, and he touches on that. It's a beautiful song. I'll share it with you after. I thought I'd wear something casual for a casual podcast that doesn't have casual content. Exactly. No, but I genuinely believe it comes from men and women not kind of looking at a narrative from a man that might be a bit too far one way, or from a woman who might be too far one way. Let's shine light on what good looks like, what good women, good men, good feminine, good masculine, and let's help each other get out of this shit. Let's get away from this fucking division and let's get together. And with powerful stories like this, it really, really moved me to my core hearing what you've done, and I'm really sorry you've been through that, and pissed me off at times. Being honest, I don't want to fucking smash someone's head in. But I couldn't thank you enough. Thank you. Beautiful. I know we could talk all day. It sounds like you've had 10 lifetimes in your 36 years so far. Out of my 200 ml of water. All right, but thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, and we'll catch up again soon. Cheers, Laura. Cheers, darling.